Welcome, Traveler, to another Invokation Academy Review Session where we go over the new content in the latest update. This time around though, we've already covered the balance in a different video, so make sure to check that out to stay up to date. There were a lot of updates. Today, we'll focus on our 3 new character cards along with some deck ideas to try, followed by the new action cards. This is one of the more impactful patches to date, and we're sure to see a huge shift in the meta. So let's introduce our first new character, Nilou. Nilou's skill is the highlight of her kit, dealing 3 Hydro damage, but more importantly applies a permanent effect where any bloom reactions you trigger are converted to a bountiful core, instead of the usual bloom core. Of course, this is provided your team only has Hydro and Dendro characters. Even if Nilou goes down, the status sticks around to convert any future blooms. Bountiful cores are summons that deal 2 Dendro damage and can stack up to 3 usages. Additionally, when there are 2 or 3 usages when you end your turn, you'll immediately fire off one of these cores. Her talent card uses her skill and adds +1 damage anytime your bountiful cores do damage. As most Nilou decks are going to be built around these cores, it's quite a powerful talent card and well worth using. Her burst costs 3 Hydro and 2 energy and deals 2 Hydro damage, and also applies a status to the target which deals another 3 Hydro at the end of the turn. While it may seem redundant that bountiful cores only deal 2 damage, which really is the same buff that bloom cores are provided, the fact that they apply Dendro makes all the difference. Once you start creating cores, they fuel themselves provided you're applying more Hydro and can easily continue reactions even if your Dendro character goes down. Because Hydro application is so important, you almost always want to run Nilou in a 2 Hydro, 1 Dendro team, and preferably with a Hydro summon as well to guarantee your cores at the end of the turn. Also, the fact that the cores trigger an extra time above 2 usages is pretty big. This makes cards like Quicknit extremely good in Nilou decks, allowing you to surprise your opponent with additional hit and maybe even an added reaction out of nowhere. Her burst, however, is pretty lackluster. While it does do 5 damage total, it can be pretty easy for your opponents to play in a way that forces you to waste that end of turn damage. The fact that it applies Hydro twice does help generate more bloom cores, but overall, Nilou decks don't tend to prioritize her burst all that much. I'm pretty sure by now you've faced plenty of Nilou decks, as she's definitely the most interesting character in version 4.2, enabling an entire new set of decks all by herself. Her pairings are also really flexible, but the easiest deck to play her in is Nilou Baizhu Oceanid. Baizhu lets you very consistently trigger your first bloom, and then after that adding Oceanid summons to the bountiful cores ensures that you'll pretty much have them for the rest of the game, relying on the damage to take your opponents while you stall and heal. For a more aggressive variant, I recently featured Nilou, Nahida, Mona in a video, so definitely check that out if you want to see Nilou in action. While it's harder to get infinite cores going, Nahida allows you to pile on damage very quickly in combination with Nilou's cores, which do a surprising amount of damage. If you do decide to try Nilou decks, just be aware that it's very weak to send off. A timely send off on a 2 usage core will set you back quite a bit, not only because of the damage, but also the lost Dendro application. Still, it's a very fun deck to play, and I'm excited to see Nilou decks refined more as we go forward. And next up, we have Baizhu. Baizhu's skill deals 1 Dendro damage and leaves a summon which deals another 1 Dendro and heals the active character for 1. His burst is pretty unique, costing 4 Dendro and 2 energy, but doing no damage initially. Instead, it provides 1 shield, and at the beginning of your turn, that shield is refreshed whether you used it or not for a total of 3 turns. When the shield is removed or refreshed, it heals for 1 HP and deals 1 Dendro damage. It's pretty complicated to wrap your head around, but essentially his skill always provides 3 HP and 3 damage, and up to 3 shields, spread out though over 2 or 3 turns. His talent uses his burst, and in addition to the healing and damage, now grants an additional die when the shield is depleted, similar to the effect from Tenacity of the Millilith. With how good Tenacity is, this actually generates quite a lot of value, and any deck looking to stall the game with Baizhu would probably want to use the talent. Though some Baizhu decks actually lean more aggressive, and so those ones may not be interested in using his burst at all, let alone the talent. The main power of Baizhu's kit really does come from his skill. Traditionally, characters with a skill that applies on hit and leaves behind a summon have been quite powerful. We can think of Fischl as an example. Particularly, Quicken decks have been really wanting an effect like this to be able to apply Dendro more consistently, as the current options are a little bit lacking. I recently featured gameplay of one of my all-time favorite decks, Weapon Quicken, which saw a pretty significant upgrade with Baizhu over previous Dendro options. Definitely check that out if you want something a little bit off meta. But of course, as we already mentioned, he slots in great into Nilou Bloom, so you can also try that out if you're interested. Overall, Baizhu's got a pretty interesting kit with both defensive and aggressive applications. We might see him get power crept more in the future with more focused character cards, but for now, he seems like a powerful choice for a lot of decks. Definitely give him a try. And last, maybe least, we have Dori. Dori's skill does 2 electro damage and leaves a 1-use summon that deals another electro damage. Her burst deals 1 electro damage and leaves a 2-use summon that heals the active character for 2 and gives 1 energy. Her talent uses her burst and buffs the healing by 1 if the character is at 6 or less HP, and provides an additional energy if the character has no energy. This effect is pretty conditional, and with a burst already being a bit weak, the talent is probably not worth including even in Dori decks. Dori suffers from the problem of being a nice all-rounder character with decent damage, healing, and energy generation, but at the same time not excelling at any one of these things in particular, which means more streamlined decks often have better options, for instance Fischl and Raiden. Electro decks also aren't too interested in stalling out the game with healing, which makes it less valuable. Unfortunately, I don't see Dori being much of a play in the metagame, but if you want to try out, one deck you can try is Dori, Xiangling, Nahida. This is a spin on a deck that originally used Raiden, but with Dori you can have much more aggressive plays, making full use of Xiangling's Pyro application to overload your opponents. This deck also makes use of Xiangling's buffed talent card as well as Stormterror's Lair, which we'll talk more about later on. It's more of a Xiangling deck than a Dori deck, but still pretty effective. Overall, these look to be quite the exciting set of new characters, with Nilou and Baizhu definitely being the headliners. This is looking to be a fun patch to try some unique and interesting decks. Next up, the new action cards, starting with our new Arcane Legend in every house a stove. The effect is pretty simple. It draws you cards equal to the round number up to a max of 4. This is pretty much the ultimate default Arcane Legend. If your deck isn't interested in any other options, you would always run this card, as at the minimum, it just effectively replaces itself and gives you a deck with 29 cards. Of course, it's much more than that, being able to turn into a strategize on round 2 and then getting even better if you can wait until rounds 3 or 4. While this effect sounds super powerful, one way to think about it is, given it costs 0, it effectively provides 1 die worth of value on rounds 2 and 3 as a cheaper strategize or Sealy, and 2 die by round 4 as a free Liyue Wharf. This is pretty similar to existing powerful arcane cards like Covenant and Courtyard, which also provide 2 die worth of value. There are also plenty of card draw effects, so it provides less of a unique effect than something like Fresh Wind of Freedom. Overall, a lot of decks will probably prefer to use a different Arcane Legend, but if you're ever not sure which one your deck actually wants, you can always use Stove and never go wrong. Next up is a card that has a lot of hype surrounding it, Stormterror's Lair. It's a location card that draws a random talent card from your deck when played, and once around, discounts a talent card when you play it or a skill with 4 or more cost, which essentially means 5 cost skills and some bursts. One important application is if your deck runs exactly 1 talent card, then playing a Stormterror's Lair guarantees drawing that talent, which essentially means you are running as many as 4 copies in your deck. This all but guarantees that you draw that talent every single game, which makes decks built around talents a lot more consistent. On top of that, because of the discount effect, you're essentially only paying 1 die for this effect, which is actually quite a good deal. And if your deck can actually utilize the discount more than once with skills, you're suddenly getting a ton of value just from a single card, though in practice, it's quite a bit harder to do than you might think. One very powerful application here is Ganyu freeze decks. These decks really wanted to draw the talent every single game, and Lair now makes that very consistent. Not only that, she can actually discount her charge shots with Lair as well. While she hasn't been meta for quite a while, we might see a resurgence of the deck now that we have Lair as a card. Another maybe less powerful but fun interaction, Lair will actually discount Kaching's Stiletto card as it counts as a talent. Kaching too can also utilize the discount again on her burst, so there could be some interesting applications here. Alongside the talent buffs, Lair is going to lead to a lot of interesting new decks built around talents, and is one of the reasons the 4.2 update is such a huge game changer for the meta. Really excited to see what people come up with for this. Last up, we have some new artifact related cards, starting with Shadow of the Sand King. This draws a card when played, and then whenever your opponent takes reaction damage while the equipped character is active, draws you another card. If you time this so that you equip it immediately before triggering a reaction, it's effectively the same as Strategize, but with the chance of drawing additional cards later. However, because it's quite restrictive, I really wouldn't recommend playing this over other card draw options unless your deck is running other artifact synergies. This might pair well if your deck contains cards like Yayoi or Rhythm of the Great Dream to discount artifacts, and it makes a pretty good first artifact for Ancient Courtyard. This is one to keep an eye out for as more cards are added, but for now most decks would probably prefer other options instead. Oceanid Clam is the expensive version of a similar artifact added last patch, getting a stack each time your character receives 3 HP total of healing, up to a max of 2 stacks. Then, the next time you deal damage, you consume your stacks to buff damage by 1 for every 1. This expensive version has the added effect of healing 3 HP when played, which means you always get 1 stack right away. While you can definitely make some pretty fun decks around stacking a bunch of healing, unfortunately, decks that are healing focused tend not to be interested in these kinds of damage effects, so I would overall avoid playing this card. Last up, we have Lair Song, which returns an equipped artifact to your hand and reduces the cost of the next one you play by 2. Yep, this is Unseen Razor, but for artifacts. But like when Unseen Razor first came out, there aren't quite enough on-play effect artifacts to really make this worth running. Of course, Oceanid Clam, which we just talked about, certainly is a nice target, allowing you to get 3 HP and 1 damage for just 1 die, which is actually a great deal. But that's pretty much the only one you have for now. This is definitely a card that will get better over time as new artifacts are added, but for now, I would avoid this one as well. And that's it for the new cards. Once again, all the balance changes were already covered in the previous videos, so if you haven't checked that out, make sure you do so. The new cards in combination with those changes really bring a breath of fresh air to Genius Invocation, and I haven't been this excited for a patch in quite some time. I'm especially looking forward to what the competitive players are going to brew up in the next tournament with these new changes. This is the best time to go and experiment with new characters and cards, or maybe even go back to an old favorite that might have been improved like I did with Weapon Quicken. If you are a newer player, be sure to attend the TCG 101 series to level up your Genius Invocation game. If there's anything you'd like to see in an upcoming video, drop a comment and I'll see how I can help. Be sure to enroll in our courses by subscribing so you can be notified when a new lesson's available. Until then, class dismissed!